Portugal has been and gone for the Portuguese Grand Prix, round 3 of the Formula One World Championship. Hello everyone and welcome to Maximum Downforce, the official Downforce Radio Formula One podcast. Joining me, as always, Jake Sanson and Topher Smith, and joining us this week, Ryan Ferris. Now, before we even get started on the Grand Prix weekend, we have just moments before recording discovered the news that Romain Grosjean will be testing a Formula One car, the Mercedes 2019 W10, at the French Grand Prix before having a full test day 2 days later on the 29th. Ryan, it's very heartwarming to see Grosjean have a Formula One test, and arguably even more heartwarming so because of his crash in Bahrain.
Definitely, it's a bit of a feel-good story after the end of last year. I think he wanted to go out of Formula One on a high after his accident, and I think there was definitely some unfinished business there. So it would be great to see him back in a car for one more time.
And realistically, Jake, now that Grosjean is back in this car, obviously it's quite a low chance of it actually happening, but do you possibly see a team picking up Grosjean in the future, or more realistically, is his time in Formula One now done?
I think it's difficult. I mean, for me, I think he still had something to give. The problem was he was in the wrong team. I would actually have liked to have seen him make a switch to Renault, because I think he would be in a position to lead the team. He would have done a good job, because when the opportunity has been there for him, he has risen to the occasion. Several times in 2020 he did. But I think the reality is we don't have enough teams now to accommodate him anymore. If there was an 11th or 12th team on the grid, then probably Grosjean could still have a chance. I just think, unfortunately, when you've been around in Formula One since 2009, as he has, been away, come back, and desperately tried to make a go of it, unfortunately, I think he's already had his time. You know, he has scored podiums, he has shown what he can do, but it was clear that he wasn't really the first choice for many people. It's a shame, because I do think there was a lot of potential there for Romain if in a strong team, in a works team even. But sadly, I don't think we're ever going to get to see what it could have been.
And Topher, with those comments that Jake has just put forward, do you agree, or do you have like a different viewpoint to offer up?
See, Romain Grosjean's a little bit of a difficult one to evaluate in some senses, because his career has been one of some real highs and some real lows. It's been a bit of an inconsistent career in a lot of respects. If you think back to 2012, for example, some would argue that's probably the worst year of his career so far, in that he picked up a race ban. He was involved in multiple first lap incidents, the most notable one being the one in Spa that year, where he ended up causing, I think it's about 5 or 6 cars to retire on the spot. But then, on the flip side of that, he's had some absolutely stellar drives. 2013, he finished on the podium, I don't know how many times in the Lotus. Could have won races that year. Spa 2015, he took what was a pretty poor Lotus that year, put it onto the podium on merit. And I think there are some arguments, definitely, that Grosjean deserves another shot at Formula One and deserves a shot in a top team than Formula One. A lot of people tend to forget about his junior career and how good he was back in the days of GP2, especially winning the title over there, winning lots and lots of races. But it's like I said, it's a bit difficult to read because of just how inconsistent he's been over the course of his entire career. I'm a little bit more on the side of, I think he's done with F1, which I don't like to say because I like Romain. I've met him once. He's a lovely guy. But there comes a point where you just think that he has to move on. And he has done that. He's now racing over in IndyCar. And we're 3-4 races into the IndyCar season so far. And he's done a good job. He scored points on debut. He's not up there challenging for victories yet, but we weren't really expecting anyone to go straight into IndyCar and challenge for a victory straight away. So, yeah, I think he is probably done with Formula One. I think he's probably better off sticking with IndyCar in a series where once he gets a full handle on the way that the series works, a full handle on the way that he can drive the car, he might even be able to challenge for victories over there. That's just one we'll have to wait and see.
And also, before we actually get into the Portuguese Grand Prix weekend, something which, in all honesty, I actually completely forgot about. It's been 2 weeks since the last weekend in Imola. And something that I did want to bring up in this podcast, Jake, is sprint qualifying races. I'll get your opinion from all three of you. But it's a step that Formula One have taken in this year where we're supposed to have the new regulations, but obviously because of COVID, they haven't come in. And I've always been of the opinion that this season is the best season to try something new. Reverse grids, sprint qualifying. I'm all for testing new formats as long as it doesn't have a negative repercussion on the sport. And as long as, even if it, does do better, if it doesn't work, don't keep it. That's always been my opinion on it. And in all honesty, I'm quite all for the sprint qualifying races, and there's less practice. What do you think about this new weekend format that we're most likely going to see in Silverstone, Monza, and Brazil? But obviously that hasn't been confirmed yet.
I don't know. I mean, I'm like you in the sense that, 2021 is a bit of a weird year for Formula One because we were supposed to get the new regulations and now we haven't. They're waiting till next year. And so these cars are essentially a slight upgrade of the 2020 cars. They're not 2021 cars at all, really, are they? So I suppose if you're going to try an experiment like this is, I agree with you, the only year that they could make this kind of experiment happen. I personally don't think it needs it. This year has already had a fabulous start to it. We've had, Hamilton win the first race, Verstappen win the second, Hamilton win the first, and they were first and second each time. So it's ridiculously close between the two of them. They could be swinging to and fro across the entire season, sharing the victories. And that's the ultimate battle that we've been wanting between these two for a long time. So I don't know if we really need something like this to happen. I mean, the only way I think it could be entertaining is if you did a reverse top 10 grid like they do in F2. But even then, I think it's two-stage managed. The thing about Formula One is that it is about the ultimate battle. The fastest will be the fastest. The 10th fastest will be the 10th fastest. There's no two ways about it. Formula One has always been about that. You can do these things in other championships. You can do reverse grids in things like F2, F3, British touring cars. You can do these kind of things. It works for that formula. But I don't know if Formula One is going to work from that. I mean, yes, you could do it in esports, but in the real world of Formula One, it kind of takes away some of the purity. And it's that same argument about, Lewis Hamilton, he's only the greatest because he's in the greatest car. Well, obviously, the best drivers get in the best cars, which means that the fastest will go fastest and the slowest will go slowest. That's what Formula One is. If you don't like that, then you should be watching something else. But that's the purity of Formula One for me. I suppose if you're going to try it, this is the only year to try it. But I kind of hope it doesn't work because I don't honestly think the sport needs it.
And Ryan, with the point system that will be awarded, first gets 3 points, second gets 2 points, and third gets 1 point. Hypothetically, if Verstappen were to finish fourth in all three sprint qualifying races and Hamilton were to win all three, and Hamilton were then to win the championship by 7 points or 8 points, there would be major backlash in the Formula One community that Hamilton may or may not have won this championship because of some rule which was only brought in halfway through the season.
Yeah, I just think it's not particularly well thought out in a way, because at the end of the day, you're going to have all of them going gung-ho into turn one and all for the rest of the race, and there's not going to be as many points handed out. There's not going to be as many positions for points handed out. So the slower teams potentially might end up having the mindset of, well, what's the point in risking destroying the car when we've got the main race tomorrow? And I feel like it's going to be another elimination qualifying situation where people are going to watch it, will do it about 1 or 2 times, and then everyone will go, yeah, that wasn't such a good idea. Because I think places like Silverstone and Monza, one of the big highlights of the weekend is the qualifying, just because, well, when we have fans, it's got one of the biggest atmospheres, and then also they're very fast circuits, and so they're super exciting to watch qualifying. But if qualifying is going to be on Friday, when most people are at work, not many people are going to be watching qualifying, are they?
And Topher, if Formula One managed to get this wrong, or even managed to get it right, surely it's a lose-lose situation for them, because one way the fans are angry because it's worked, and in the other way, fans are angry because it hasn't worked.
I suppose that's one way you could look at it. Yeah, I'm all for Formula One trying new things. It's already been mentioned about the elimination qualifying that we had back in 2016. And I think that particular instance, it was an intriguing idea. It was like an interesting way of doing it. But ultimately, it didn't work, and they scrapped the system after 2 races. I think more than anything, what Formula One needs is to be ready to have the same attitude in that they have to acknowledge that it hasn't worked. That's if it doesn't work. They'll need to acknowledge that we've tried it, it hasn't worked. Let's go back to the proven system we've got in place at the moment. And in some situations, I feel as though the qualifying system we've got at the moment is actually a lot more exciting than some of the races that we get. As in, we've got this knockout style system, as you all know, Q1, Q2, Q3. And it creates a lot of drama. You know, teams fighting to get out of the relegation zone in the earlier stages, and then you've got the top 10 shootout between the 10 fastest drivers. I feel as though we didn't really need a change-up. I did say that I'm all for trying new things, and I am. But qualifying is one of those things that I think Formula One has got pretty much spot on since it was introduced back in 2006, I think it was, if I remember correctly. I think it was Bahrain that had it first that year.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's an interesting idea, and I am very intrigued to see how it works, and more importantly, if it works. I do think Ryan has raised a good point there in saying that it might affect the viewership in some ways because of the new timetable. But at the end of the day, if you are a Formula One fan, you are going to tune in to watch the main Grand Prix no matter what. I mean, I'm usually busy on Saturday, so I don't get to watch qualifying a lot of the time anyway, but I will still always tune in for the race. So I don't think the viewership will be affected that much by it. We might get a few people who are obviously a bit disgruntled because of the new schedule. But at the end of the day, it's the main Grand Prix that is the one that counts. Sprint qualifying, yeah, I'm happy to give it a go. Let's see what it's like.
What it will do, of course, is it will give Helmut Marko a great excuse for why Max Verstappen hasn't won those 3 Grand Prix, because he seems to be finding those excuses from such a left field angle. I mean, if we do lose points from that, if he does lose points, as you suggested earlier, like losing the title by 2 points when Hamilton scored 9 for those 3 races. That's a bit of ammunition for Helmut Marko. Well, we've now lost a race because of the new qualifying system, the new sprint race qualifying. So yeah, if anything else, it gives us more talking points.
Oh no, just a slight tangent to that, actually. That's just cast my mind back to, what year was it? Was it 2016 where they introduced double points for the season finale? Or was it 2015, actually? 14, thank you. Obviously, at the end of that particular season, Hamilton won the championship anyway, regardless of whether it's double points or not. But just imagine if it had that influence on it. What if it has swung it the other way in favour of Rosberg? Would we have been talking about it in the same way, maybe? It's just a little tangent that my mind went off just then when you talk about the possibility of the championship order changing as a result of that rule.
Well, we will just have to wait until Silverstone when Formula One trials the new system. Anyway, back to Portimao, the Portuguese Grand Prix, won again by Lewis Hamilton, his 97th Grand Prix victory. The team were extremely excited about the prospect that they now lead the championship by 8 points. Ryan, although it was quite close between Hamilton and Verstappen, is it possibly edging on the fact now that Mercedes may have the fastest car again? Because Hamilton flew away from Verstappen and Bottas.
I think it's still very much 50-50. But I do feel in the last race or so, Mercedes have definitely found something. Where at the pre-season it looked like that car was an absolute dog. It looked undrivable. It looks like a completely different car now. There's no complaints from the drivers. And it kind of looks like our stereotypical Mercedes that we've seen for the last, I don't know how many years since they've been dominating the championship. So I think it's definitely going to make things interesting now. Whether or not it is going to go back to how it was with the likes of Hamilton just leaving everyone behind and it was just a battle for second place. I don't know, but I think the main thing that we'd have to look out for is how well the Red Bull performed in Barcelona, where it has won at before.
And Topher, like Ryan just mentioned, that Red Bull are still in this fight, but there was quite yet another instance of track limits where Verstappen actually lost the fastest lap of the Grand Prix on the final lap of the race, which he was quite disgruntled to be told in the middle of an interview rather than from his team, which is one way of being told that you've lost a point. But either way, is this something Red Bull really do need to take a look at, or are Mercedes just going to take advantage of this continuous, almost ignorance of the regulations in terms of track limits, because Verstappen did not know about turn 14?
Look, when it comes to track limits, I've already mentioned this in one of our previous podcasts. I think that the white line is the white line, no exceptions. I don't agree with the fact that the stewards will only look at specific corners as opposed to others. As there are some corners that I've seen in the tracks that we've had where they've enforced the white line rule at one corner but not another, and then at the ones where the rule is not enforced, drivers are full on taking advantage. I mean, they're racing drivers, they're going to, but I just think if we're going to have this rule in place, why is it only applied to certain corners and not others? Last time we talked about this, I gave the analogy of a football match where you imagine a scenario that a referee says that the ball's out of play if it goes over the white line, but not in that particular part of the pitch. That doesn't make any sense as far as the football match is concerned. So why have we got this situation in Formula One where we apply the rule to some places, but not to others? It's just inconsistent, in my opinion. With Red Bull and Max Verstappen at the end of the Portuguese Grand Prix, Helmut Marko, he was saying that it was completely wrong that Verstappen lost the fastest lap point because of it. But look at the replay. Verstappen did exceed the track limits. So quite rightly, that fastest lap of his was deleted. I don't think they really had any arguments against that. But for me, it's just the same arguments over and over again. If you're going to apply the rule at one or two corners, apply it to all of the corners. I mean, you can agree or disagree all you want, but that's my opinion when it comes to track limits. It needs to be consistent.
And Jake, the fight between Mercedes and Red Bull is really at its peak now. We've had it building up over the past few seasons. The fight in Bahrain 2018, punches on track were thrown, words were said in the press conference, obviously Vettel describing what, like Topher, comparing it to a football match. Either way, we've had this building up, and now it is really at its peak. Both of them have said that they trust each other to battle. They trust each other to give each other the space and to not make contact. But when is this battle going to bubble over? Because with their personalities, with Hamilton's belief that he surely is one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history, and Verstappen's David position to Hamilton's Goliath, surely it's going to bubble over at some point.
I think the Red Bull Ring. Genuinely, I think it could be as soon as the Red Bull Ring, because you've got such a dynamic battle between these two teams now. It's the battle we've all been screaming for. It's the battle that Red Bull have been trying to get back into for several years now. And now that they're there, neither team's going to want to relinquish its stranglehold. It could even be as early as this coming Grand Prix, the Spanish Grand Prix this week. You know, we could see fireworks there, and there's a genuine possibility of it. Because you've got two incredibly fiery, motivated individuals. Hamilton was thinking of ending his career a short while ago. Now that Verstappen is challenging him, I don't think he's going to want to go anywhere for a while now, because this is the battle he's been wanting for quite a few seasons. So there's no incentive for Hamilton to leave and duck out of it, because this is the challenge he wants. And for Verstappen, this could be the best chance he's ever going to get of winning a world title in the current generation. So as far as everybody's concerned, you know, Red Bull are more motivated than ever to make Max Verstappen the youngest ever world champion, which is still possible if he does it this year. For Hamilton, it's about proving to everybody, and probably to himself as well, that he is the greatest of all time. So this is the battle where it's going to get ugly, I think, a couple of times in the year, which is great for us because, you know, it moves the sport forward. It gives us plenty to talk about. Just echoing what Topher was saying about the whole track limits issue. I mean, it's baffling that these guys don't know what is and what isn't track limits. I mean, come on, these guys are Formula One drivers. They're Formula One teams. How do you not know what the interpretation of track limits is? Surely there are discussions, whether they're on Zoom or otherwise, with the officials about what track limits are. I know for a fact that with the FIA karting, we do a briefing, and we do a virtual briefing each week that we have an event where we record a video, we show everybody what the rules are with race starts, with track limits, with pit lane regulations, with transponders, with everything. And we put everything in that video. And we say at the beginning of the video, it is your responsibility to watch this video and make sure you understand. If you don't watch this video, you are basically responsible for any penalties or sanctions that you get throughout the course of the weekend. So make sure you watch it carefully. How are Formula One drivers and teams not clear what the regulations are? There is a big book that they can read. If they're not willing to read it, then I say more fool them. They deserve the penalty. It's the problem I have with Red Bull and with Helmut Marko in particular. You're having a go at the FIA for bringing these forces into place. Whether you agree with them or not, you can't suddenly start arguing about what those regulations are, because all the other teams seem to know what they are. They seem to have done their homework. They seem to have accepted it and gone, yeah, it's irritating, but what can we do? Red Bull seems to be the only one that's throwing its toys out the pram and going, yeah, well, we've been denied this, we've been denied that. All I recommend to Helmut Marko and Red Bull is keep your car on the racetrack. It really isn't that difficult. It's not complicated. If you're going to be robbed of a pole position of a race win and a fastest lap because of track limits, don't exceed track limits. It really isn't that complicated.
And obviously, this is actually, just in case you didn't know, this is Red Bull's best start to a season, the first 3 races since 2011. And that championship season was dominant for Sebastian Vettel. So you never know if Red Bull can pull their finger out a bit and find another step ahead of Mercedes. It could be an echo of things to come. Either way, it was Lewis Hamilton's 97th Grand Prix victory. Max Verstappen in second with Valtteri Bottas finishing off the podium. Sergio Perez, another good point score for Red Bull in fourth, with Lando Norris taking 5th place. He's now 3rd in the championship standings. Charles Leclerc in 6th, with Esteban Ocon in 7th, and his Alpine teammate Fernando Alonso scoring 8th place. A good 10 points for Alpine there. Daniel Ricciardo 16th to 9th in that Grand Prix, with Pierre Gasly finishing out the points. Carlos Sainz Jr. just missed out on some points with Antonio Giovinazzi in 12th. Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll were 13th and 14th for Aston Martin, with Yuki Tsunoda in 15th. George Russell, another impressive showing in the Williams, with Mick Schumacher beating Nicholas Latifi, Nikita Mazepin finishing nearly a minute behind them, and Kimi Raikkonen, the only driver not to finish that Grand Prix. So, as I just mentioned there, Topher, Daniel Ricciardo, 16th to points, my personal driver of the day. He had a fantastic race. Obviously messed up the pit stop just a bit. He didn't meet his marks in terms of coming into the pit box. But realistically, does this show that Ricciardo is starting to get grips with that McLaren?
Yeah, absolutely. I think his qualifying performance was just a bit of an anomaly, if I'm completely honest. I mean, we know that these drivers, they're absolutely fantastic at what they do, but they are going to have some days where they're not quite as on it as they should be. And Daniel Ricciardo doing, let's say, a subpar job in qualifying, to put it rather politely. It was just one of those days for him, I think. He's not going to get it right every single time he goes out onto the track. I think it's just one of those days where he didn't really get himself up to speed. But his performance in the race, as you say, he went from P16 to P9 and picked himself up a couple of points. That just shows how good a driver he actually is. He put the struggles of Saturday behind him. He got on with a job that we all know that he can do. There's so many instances that I can think of in the past where he's licked the stamp and sent it, as he'd say, and he's just gone for it. And Sunday was no exception. He put his head down, he got on with the job, and in the end, 2 well-deserved points. He probably would have scored a few more had he qualified a bit better. But as I said, you're just going to have those days sometimes as a driver. Sometimes you'll have a day where it doesn't quite go right for reason A or reason B or reason Z or whatever. Yeah, it happens from time to time. I don't think that it will be a massive setback in his McLaren career. I think he's just going to put it behind him now, look forward to the next race, and aim to get into the top 10 again.
And Ryan, obviously Lando Norris currently 3rd in the championship, ahead of the likes of Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez in much faster cars. That is an absolutely immense achievement after 3 Grand Prix. Obviously, he had the podium last race, which has helped him a lot, but more or less, his consistency has been, yet again, another friend to him this season. It's the highest amount of points he scored in his Formula One career in the first 3 races. And he's really outperforming a proven Grand Prix winner and someone who much of the Formula One community believes can win a world championship in Daniel Ricciardo. Does this mean that he is ready to be McLaren's new team leader?
I think there is definitely potential there. I think Obviously, Zach Brown said that Lando had to step it up once again this season, and he really has stepped it up this season. But also, McLaren have really stepped it up. They're the only team so far this season that has had both cars score points in each race, I believe. So to come away with that sort of stat, that's pretty good. But for Ricciardo, I feel obviously he's still finding his way in the car. He's starting to get some confidence with it. It'll be interesting to see what Ricciardo can do once he's got that full confidence. You may find that both McLarens could be fighting for the podiums.
And Jake, you saw Lando Norris in karts, I believe, and obviously we did talk a few months ago now, actually, about Lando Norris. I believe it was the Po Grand Prix in 2017, where you said that he crashed out of the lead, I think.
Yes.
That's one that you said that was one of your most prominent memories in racing. Do you believe that the person who he was when he was in karting is the same driver he is now?
Yes and no. You know, he was always very laid back and always very, very relaxed. But I think in karting, there was a bit more of an intensity to him. He was a little bit more serious. He did have that sort of chilled atmosphere, but he wasn't quite so open. He wasn't quite so warm. So he would be very, very calm and relaxed, but he wasn't as approachable in a way. There was always a sort of a slight nervousness to him. Now that he's in Formula One, from his point of view as a rookie in 2019, it was like the pressure was off because he'd been accepted by McLaren. He's in their family. He's very much a part of their future plans. So it's almost like he can do no wrong. And he's riding that crest of confidence at the moment. You know, this is year 3 for him now. And he is totally embedded and cemented into that team. And I don't think there's any chance. I mean, there might be a sort of a hint, and people have suggested, you know, maybe he might go to Ferrari, maybe he might go to Mercedes, maybe he might even end up at Red Bull. But I know Zach Brown is a very crafty individual. He will not let Lando Norris go without a massive, massive fight. He absolutely adores Lando. He genuinely thinks he's the future of McLaren for the next 10 years. And I think he thinks that Lando is going to be world champion with them. So, you know, he is such a different character in that sense. You know, like from his point of view, the pressure's off. The only pressure he really has is the pressure he puts on himself. You know, McLaren have made it very clear they think he's the right choice. It's now up to everybody else to match him. And it's really interesting that Ricciardo has now come into the team this year because people have described Ricciardo as a world champion in waiting. Now they're saying that about Lando. So you've got 2 world champions in waiting and they're kind of competing for the pride of the team. And Lando's winning that. I wasn't expecting it to be quite so easy a battle for Lando to be ahead of Danny Rick, in all honesty. I thought Ricciardo would make it a lot tougher for him. But I wonder if that momentum shift of walking away from Red Bull when he was at his height has actually, it's kind of shifted Danny Rick's mentality a little bit. Perhaps he now feels he has to prove himself, that it was the right decision. And I'm not so sure that's so easy for him because of the 2 years he spent at Renault. It wasn't what he was expecting. Maybe I'm just seeing something a bit earlier than perhaps I need to, but Danny Rick looks like he is struggling a little bit at McLaren. Portugal was a good example of what he can do when the chips are down. But from his point of view, you know, the race was already lost. So he may as well just throw gung-ho to it and come up with points. And he did. So I would love to see Danny Rick qualifying from the front in the top 5 because Lando hasn't finished outside the top 5 yet, which is an amazing achievement for him. And certainly, you know, if they continue to improve that McLaren, there's a chance he'll win races this year without any shadow of a doubt. Danny Rick is not looking like the driver at McLaren who'll win races this year at this moment. I really hope, and I'm sure many other people hope, that changes.
And Ryan, Alpine, to put it lightly, have had the start to the season that they wouldn't have wanted, but Portugal really did change that in the fact that they, throughout the weekend, looked to be possibly even the 4th or 3rd fastest car on the grid. They were constantly in the top 10. Fernando Alonso obviously didn't make it into Q3. He was knocked out in Q2. But even still, Fernando Alonso made it into 8th place, and Esteban Ocon was on fire this season. Everyone thought that Ocon would come into Alpine and be outperformed by Alonso. But realistically, he is really doing well to stay on par with the 2-time world champion. Do you think this is Alpine's true pace in the 2021 season? Or do you think they can make another step up?
Well, I hope this is the true pace, because the other problem about the Portuguese circuit is it is so different to any other circuit on the calendar, so it can throw up some results that you may not expect. So I'm hoping coming out of Portugal that the sort of performance that we saw from Alpine, that is what they've got, and that they can develop on top of that. Because Ocon surprised me with his qualifying performance. He was brilliant. It was almost like same as McLaren in that, you had the younger driver, less experienced driver taking the spoils and getting it into Q3, and then you had the two-time world champion not quite making it in there. But then it seems that Alpine is good enough for Alonso to start to show what he's really made of, and we started to see some real vintage Fernando Alonso in that race with some of the moves that he was pulling off. He's now starting to look as though he's now comfortable back in Formula One.
And Topher, if Alpine keep up this form, and if Esteban Ocon does manage to keep outscoring Fernando Alonso, do you actually see them changing their driver lineup this year? There's been a lot of speculation surrounding Pierre Gasly and a possible move to the French outfit. But realistically, with a two-time world champion in the car, and Esteban Ocon, who now that he's had a season back in Formula One and he's had a few races in this car, he is getting back up to speed in the championship. Do you think they even need to change for 2022 as it stands?
If you're asking the question, will they change the drivers this season? No, absolutely not. Ocon, he's been performing brilliantly so far. And Alonso, he's got the megastar appeal. While he's in the car, Alpine are getting attention, which is attention they want basically for their commercial interests. Alonso's been really good to them for that reason, as well as doing a good job on track as well. With regards to 2022, it's a little bit up in the air at the moment because you really don't know what's going to happen there. There's been rumours about maybe Pierre Gasly joining the team for 22. But one thing I mentioned in a previous podcast was that this season might be a bit make or break for Esteban Ocon, depending on how well he does up against Fernando Alonso. And so far, he's doing a stellar job up against him, which if he can continue this form for the rest of the season, that's in some ways possibly going to guarantee his Formula One future. It might not necessarily be with Alpine, but maybe another team will take a look and I think maybe we should take a punt on him. Maybe Mercedes would want to take another look at Ocon. So I think it's very clear now that Ocon's place on the Mercedes hierarchy has been somewhat jumped by George Russell now. But if Ocon can continue to put in these stellar performances, maybe they'll start to think twice about who to put in the car for 2022. If we have the situation that the Alpine lineup in 22 should be Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly, just hypothetically, it's quite well documented. Those two do not get along at all well. And I think that's something that Alpine might actually factor in when they make their decision on the drivers. Do they want to put together a driver pairing where they know that those two drivers have a history and just straight up don't like each other? There's so many different questions regarding Alpine and what they're going to do with their drivers. But as it stands at this moment in time, I don't see any reason at all why they will or why they should change their driver lineup.
And a driver lineup which is new to 2021, like most other teams, is Aston Martin. Now, Jake, Sebastian Vettel managed to get into Q3 with Aston Martin for the first time. He qualified 10th overall at the end of the day. The main thing about this is Lance Stroll had a fresh upgrade package. He had arguably a faster car than Vettel, yet he was 17th on the grid. So purely does this show, or perhaps it's pure coincidence, that Sebastian Vettel is getting into the groove at Aston Martin. He's found where he wants the car to be. And with this new upgrade package that he should be getting in Spain, me and Ryan were talking about it earlier actually, do you think he can continue to perform at the Spanish Grand Prix and beyond?
Such a difficult question. I am currently of the opinion that I haven't seen anything from either driver, really, in the first three races to justify their expense. So, it's just baffling how either driver genuinely think they can still be fast and competitive in 2021. I think Vettel has a slightly better claim to that than Alonso because he's still quite young by Formula One standards. He's 34, I think. But look, for me, I've said this time and time again. The definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And I think Sebastian and Fernando are both guilty of that in 2021. They're trying to rekindle past glories. It's not going to happen anymore. I can't see a situation where Vettel's going to be world champion with Aston Martin. I can't see a situation where Fernando Alonso is going to be world champion with Alpine. They've got to get into a Mercedes or a Red Bull, and neither of them are welcome there anymore. It's been made abundantly clear. This is insanity. To me, the teams should be saving their cash and investing it into someone who is 0.2 of a second a lap slower, because you save so much money in the driver contract. You can save millions, and then you can make the car 0.3 of a second, 0.4 of a second faster. So the time you lose in a driver, you make back in the car. And that's what McLaren did. They got rid of Alonso and they brought in Carlos Sainz. That's what Ferrari did. They got rid of Vettel. They brought in Sainz. Instantly, immediate performance gains. What on earth did Aston Martin and Alpine think they're going to do having a former multiple world champion? What does it bring to them? Does it bring them results? I don't think it does. Not in the same way that a highly motivated young driver in the same situation, like a Pierre Gasly, like a Daniel Ricciardo, who's not as much money. They should have gone for someone along those lines. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all why they would invest so much money for someone who's so much of a liability in terms of, the expectation of results, and when they don't deliver, it just brings negative press, nothing but negative press. It makes Vettel look good. It doesn't make Vettel look good. It doesn't make the team look good. And the same for Alonso and Alpine. I genuinely don't know why they bothered. Surely we're in a cost-cutting exercise in Formula One. Why spend a ludicrous amount of money on somebody who won world championships nearly a decade ago, and in Alonso's case, over a decade ago? You need to go for something fresh. You need to go with something new and spend your money on the car.
Now, stepping away from modern Formula One, as you guys know, this is probably one of my favourite segments on this show. On this day, May 5th, in 1985, can you tell me, Topher, what Grand Prix we saw?
May 5th, 1985. The first thing that comes to mind in 1985 is Ayrton Senna's first Grand Prix victory. I'm not sure if that was in May, though. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'm racking my brain here. Go on, you go for it, Jake.
Can I have a guess? Am I okay to have a guess? I think it was the last ever Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort.
Well, you could think that, but you'd be wrong.
Okay.
It was the 1985 San Marino Grand Prix, won initially by Alain Prost. But after the race, he was actually disqualified from the Grand Prix for being underweight. Gentlemen, my question to you in this On This Day question is, who won the race?
Oh, I think I know this. Wasn't it Elio De Angelis?
Okay, so Topher's going for De Angelis.
Let's go for a wild one and say it was Riccardo Patrese.
Brian?
Nah, you've put me on the spot now. I'm trying to rack my brains who was driving for Ferrari at that point. Because I was kind of getting mixed up between the year when everyone started to run out of fuel, which was the speed. That was 86.
I think it was Alboreto.
It could be
Alboreto was with them.
Yeah, I think Alboreto and Johansson. I think if
Alboreto
I
and Johansson
correctly
were with the team in 85.
I'll go for Alboreto.
That's a good shout.
It was Elio De Angelis. Topher.
Oh, well done, Topher.
Well done. Topher now leads the championship by half a point to Chris Cabernet. And we all know what the prize is, a can of Rich Energy. So, or a Cadbury's chocolate bar, depending on your choice. But I'm going to throw a curveball at you, Jake. You can make up some points here, as can you, Ryan.
Oh?
In 2002, Prost Grand Prix sold cars at auction to try and make up some money that they had lost going bankrupt. They made $900,000 US. Can you tell me the exact number of cars that they sold at that auction?
Oh, that is a good one. That is a really good question.
That's a very tough question. I haven't.
I'm going to guess Well, it's 2002, so I'm going to guess 3. I think they would have sold 3 cars.
Ryan?
I'm going to say 4.
Mm.
And Topher?
Is this a closest wins or just straight up get the number right?
I'll see how I feel.
Well, I'm going to say 5, just to be awkward.
Right.
It was 12. They sold 12 Grand Prix cars at auction. I believe they sold all of them. I'm not entirely sure, but it was 12.
My goodness.
So there you go.
Where are they all? I've not seen a Prost Grand Prix since 2002. Where are they all? That is an astonishing fact. 12 cars were sold.
I've
Who's
seen
got
a few
them?
pop up on these Grand Prix experience track day things over in France.
Ah, okay.
So if you do own one of those Prost Grand Prix cars, make sure you get in touch with us at downforceuk or hotmail.co.uk.
We would love to drive a Prost Formula 1 car. We would love it.
Now, moving on from 2002 to a driver who was still in Formula 1 in 2002, Kimi Räikkönen, Topher.
Yes.
He didn't have the best of races, did he?
Well, he didn't really have much of a race, did he? It was over pretty much as soon as it started. He was speaking about it after the race. So basically, he ran into the back of his own teammate, Antonio Giovinazzi, just straight up driver error. And Kimi admitted that at the end. He said that at that particular moment, he was actually looking at his dashboard. When he looked back up, he just didn't realise that he was that close to the back of his teammate, and the collision happened. Kimi is experienced enough to know that that won't be like a rookie error, as it were, for lack of better words. If he says that it's just a simple case of he was looking at the dashboard and just made the error, I believe him. It happens. I already said about Ricciardo earlier that no driver is absolutely perfect. They are going to make mistakes from time to time. And in this case, Kimi just simply made an error and he put his hands up to it. He admitted it, which is fair enough by him. But it's not really what you want for a team that's fighting for points at every race. It's a team that is reliant on its drivers getting points to up their own standings in the constructors and also to bring in more budget, more prize money. I don't think I've really got much more to say about the incident, if I'm honest. It was just a simple error on Kimi's part. He admitted to it, said it was his mistake. He'll now be moving on to the next race.
And Ryan, surely Kimi Räikkönen, I believe he's in his 18th or 19th Formula 1 season now with the break that he had from 2010 to 2011. Do you believe that it is his time to exit Formula 1? Or do you think he may even have a couple more years in him still?
To be honest, I think he's been performing well enough in that Alfa Romeo that I don't quite think it is time for him to leave. The team are very happy with him in the fact that they have a driver who knows what he wants to perform the best, and he knows exactly how to get it, where they potentially wouldn't get that from a young driver. And so they like having a driver who knows what they want and knows what they need to extract the most out of the car. And there has been times where he has managed to do that and score points from it.
And Jake, onto the other side of the garage, it wasn't the best race for Giovinazzi in the sense that we didn't really see him afterwards.
That is the entirety of Antonio Giovinazzi's career in a nutshell. I haven't really seen him. And you see his result in qualifying, and he occasionally pops up into 11th or 12th in qualifying, and you go, oh, hello, Giovinazzi's done well. And then the second he gets into the race, he just becomes Mr. Cellophane. You just look right through him. Nobody can really see what he's doing. And I don't really see that this is working. I mean, anybody can drive a Formula 1 car out on a track quickly if you're at that level for one lap. But to be able to sustain it for an entire race distance, that's the key. That's the true factor. And I just don't think Giovinazzi has what it takes to be at the front level. I mean, Alfa Romeo have made it very clear, they're with Giovinazzi to help him mold, to help him grow. He's part of the Ferrari Young Driver Academy still, I believe. And they are helping him to sort of work his way up. Can you see him driving for Ferrari? I can't. I genuinely can't see that happening. I can't see him driving for Red Bull. I can't see him driving for Mercedes. he's not really on anybody's shopping list, is he? He's not really going anywhere other than Alfa Romeo. And in all honesty, I don't think he brings much to the team. I think actually Robert Kubica brings more to the team. And in all honesty, I don't think he would do a worse job than Giovinazzi currently does. I'm absolutely convinced. From a commercial point of view, it would make more sense to put Kubica in the car. Now, before anybody leaps down my throat and says, yeah, but Kubica wasn't fast enough, I think you'll find in 2019 at Williams, he was the one that scored the championship point for Williams, not George Russell. So Robert Kubica does still have what it takes, not to run at the front, okay. But to be in the midfield, yeah, I think Robert Kubica's still got it. So I genuinely don't know why they've kept Giovinazzi in that car. I mean, he can be brilliant over one lap. Excellent. But the Grand Prix is not one lap. It's 66 in Portimao's case. So I just don't think he's got it. I don't think he's got what it takes, sadly.
But, Jake, just to bring you up on your points of what you're saying about Giovinazzi never going to Ferrari, I'm not going to go ahead and say that he will before you jump to any conclusions. But were we or were we not thinking the exact same thing about Felipe Massa when he went from Sauber to Ferrari back in the day? He didn't really set the world alight at all in his first season with Sauber. And then before you know it, he's being put up to the Ferrari role. And in that particular instance, it was to play the number 2 role, as it were, to Michael Schumacher at the time. And then Massa eventually came into his own. Arguably should have won the title in 2008. That's neither here nor there. With Giovinazzi... go on, Jake. Go on.
I see what you're saying. I do see what you're saying. You've got to remember that the difference was that in 2004, 2005, Massa was actually doing test sessions with Ferrari. He was with them in their car and actually putting a lot of data and a lot of laps in. So Ferrari could truly assess him for what he could be. And he was actually setting very comparable lap times to Schumacher and setting faster lap times in some cases than Barrichello, which is why they decided to give him a chance when Barrichello walked away. You're in 2021. Giovinazzi hasn't sat in a Ferrari F1 car for over a year now, I think. And I just you don't hear Leclerc and Sainz talking about how brilliant Giovinazzi a driver is. In fact, I don't think I've heard any driver in the Formula One paddock talk about the glowing excellence of Antonio Giovinazzi in quite the same way. So I just don't think his stock is high enough. He's not testing top running cars. He's not getting the seat time to actually grow, and he doesn't have the natural talent to back it up. I just don't think Giovinazzi is the real deal.
Well, the point that I was getting at when I brought up Felipe Massa was that sometimes Ferrari can look to employ a driver for other reasons, if that makes sense. So, yeah, Massa was testing and he was quick, but at the end of the day, he was brought in to be a number 2 driver. In the case of Antonio Giovinazzi, I'm not going to say that the same thing is going to happen. I think when Giovinazzi first came into Formula One, a lot was expected of him. He'd done a really good one and only season in GP2. He fought Pierre Gasly all the way to the end for the title there. And people are thinking maybe this is the next big Italian in Formula One. And he's had his flashes of brilliance here and there. I think if he is ever to get to Ferrari, I'm not saying that he definitely will, but if he was, I think what he's got going for him more than anything is the fact that he's an Italian. I don't want to put any damper on his talent. He is a good driver. We have seen some exceptional performances from him. But at the same time, there is almost that appeal, if you like, of an Italian driving for Ferrari. And is Giovinazzi the right driver to do that? I think maybe at the start of his Formula One career, I would have said, yes, the potential is there for that to happen. But as he gets further on into his Formula One career, and we can see a lot more of what he's made of, I don't think he's quite got the consistency. He does have flashes of brilliance from time to time. He does have speed, but he doesn't exhibit that speed often enough. I think that is what's going to go against him ultimately.
Yeah, he's fast over one lap. You know, Jarno Trulli was fast over one lap, and he was not World Championship winning material. The worrying thing is that Antonio Giovinazzi reminds me, as an old school Formula One fan, of Andrea De Cesaris. And that's not a good comparison. I'm sorry, but it's not. Yeah,
that's a very interesting comparison you've made there, Jake. I'm not sure I'd quite go with Andrea De Cesaris. I think there's probably quite a few other drivers, but I take your point.
Well, look about it. When he's in a competitive position, what does he tend to do? He throws it away. He bottles it under pressure. And that's what the Cesaris used to do all the time.
I think you make a fair point there, Jake. Going back to what we were discussing earlier on about will Giovinazzi be at Alfa Romeo in the future, I'm sort of leaning more towards the opinion of I think Raikkonen might retire at the end of this year. Alfa Romeo, they could well go for 2 new drivers, so potentially Callum Ilott, maybe Robert Schwartzman, maybe Mick Schumacher could jump ship from Haas to Alfa Romeo. There's a lot of different permutations there. But I kind of feel as though that if Raikkonen does retire at the end of this season, Alfa Romeo might want to give Giovinazzi at least one more season just for some consistency more than anything, and also maybe give him a chance to be the team leader, see if he can grow even further. Alfa Romeo is one of those teams that's a little bit difficult to predict in that regard. So a lot of it hinges on what Raikkonen does. So they could end up with the same driver lineup again, which I think is unlikely. They could drop Giovinazzi in favour of Ilott, for example, or they could go for a completely different driver lineup. I just don't know what they're going to do, but I've thought for a while now that this is going to be Raikkonen's last season in Formula One, and if he does decide to retire, I think they might keep on Giovinazzi just for continuity.
Now, moving on from the midfield to what can only be described as the back of the grid, George Russell, Ryan, really impressed. Once again, he nearly made it into Q3, and arguably, he was one of the best drivers that weekend. He was consistent. Unfortunately, we didn't see him on screen, rarely, but that's purely because of his consistent lap times. He didn't make very many mistakes, and I think he may have even lapped Nikita Mazepin and possibly Nicholas Latifi. I'm not entirely sure if he lapped his teammate, but Mazepin was 2 laps down and Russell was only 1 lap down. So do you think that after Imola and after the crash with Valtteri Bottas, George Russell needed to bounce back, and he did it?
Yeah, I felt he bounced back a bit. I was quite, not expecting to see in the race Latifi pulling a move on Russell at one point. Because usually Russell's he's gone up the road and either Latifi's shadowing him or not able to keep up. But there was a brief moment in the race where Latifi genuinely actually pulled a move on Russell midway through the race. But it's hard because obviously Russell said that the way the car is at the moment, it just can't follow a car in front. So it seems that Williams has got good 1-lap pace, but when it comes to the race where they're having to deal with traffic, the car's just not stable enough to be able to keep with the traffic. So yeah, I feel, as always, George is extracting everything out of that car and more, but it's just not quite there to challenge for those points that he needs in some circumstances.
And Jake, Nicholas Latifi didn't have the best of races in comparison to his teammate. He was fighting with Mick Schumacher for much of the race and actually got beaten by Schumacher right at the end of the Grand Prix. Schumacher made an overtake on him. Do you think this was just a bad day for Latifi, or do you think there is something more to it?
It's a 50-50 argument, because I have been watching Latifi since the start of the season, and I genuinely think he's actually making a case for most improved driver of 2021 compared to last year. I think he's done an exceptional job. If you look at the pace that he carried at Imola and the determination he's showcased at Portimao, I think Nicholas Latifi is definitely one of the most improved drivers in Formula One over the last 12 months. I mean, he had a tough year last year in a dog of a car as a rookie. And he hasn't thrown his toys out of the pram. He's got on with it. He's not acted like a pay driver at any point. He's just gone, okay, well, we're a team. We need to work together. We're a unified force. And he has worked in collaboration with George, with all of the people there, to actually make change. And that Williams is getting competitive. I mean, it's not there yet. It's not a point-scoring car yet, but it's definitely looking closer to being one. So a lot of that comes down to Nick. I think he's done a terrific job. So I'm hoping that Portugal is just a blip. But it is a bit early to say. I think we've got to wait a few more races before we make an assessment. I'm still a little curious as to why Mercedes continue to put George in Williams. for 2021. I don't really understand that. If they wanted to put him in a car to assess what he's really capable of, even though they had that little snapshot at Sakhir, why didn't they engineer him to go to Aston Martin in place of Sebastian Vettel? Because the science of that decision is so sound. You wouldn't be spending anywhere near as much money on a world champion. You could spend more of that money on developing the car. I think Russell and Stroll would have made way more sense to Aston Martin, having a top British driver in a British car like the Aston Martin. Marketing, gold. That would have been sensational. And we know how damn fast Russell is. He could have given them a top 5 finish by now. He easily could have done. And yet you're going to basically see if Russell's going to get any better based on a car that's slugging around at the back of the grid. It's lunacy. I think it would have made much more sense for Toto to do a wheeler-dealer with Lawrence Stroll and put George in the Aston Martin. I think it would have made more sense for all parties concerned.
And Topher, despite Jake's comments that it's hard to see a driver's true performance in a car which is at the back of the grid, Mick Schumacher had a major step up this weekend from last weekend. Obviously, he crashed under the safety car at Imola, trying to heat up his tyres, lost his front wing. But this weekend, he was massively on the pace in terms of what his car can deliver. He was fighting Latifi, beat Latifi, and I think Haas have struck a major achievement in what they've managed to do with Mick this Grand Prix.
Oh, absolutely. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I think the icing on the cake for them was the fact that Schumacher was able to have that battle on track with Nicholas Latifi and ultimately pressure him into a mistake, get past on track and win it on the road. It was an absolutely fantastic achievement from Mick. But when it comes to just looking at Haas as its own unit, there's that great saying in Formula One that the best comparison you can have is against your teammate. It's the best way you can gauge just how good a driver is, or maybe in some cases just how not good a driver is. So with a shoe,
I mean, it's funny you talked about the icing on the cake. I would have argued that it was the marzipan, or is that the mazepin on the cake? I don't know. There you go.
We're back onto the puns again, are we? I've lost my train of thought now. So yeah, Schumacher and Mazepin. I think it was expected of them by a lot of people that Schumacher would be the one leading the way in that particular inter-team battle. But were we really expecting it to be that much of a walkover? I mean, Schumacher finished over a minute up the road to Mazepin, and the thing is with Haas, they've already said that they're focusing more on 2022. They're not spending any of their development tokens. I think they maybe spent one for Bahrain just to help the car, but since then they're not spending anything. They're just focusing on 22. They've already resigned themselves to the fact that this year is going to be a very difficult year for them. But still, Schumacher and Mazepin, they're in the same car. They're fighting with the same machinery, albeit with differing setups, but that's just down to driver preference. But still, you don't finish over a minute behind your teammate unless something is wrong, not just maybe with the car, but maybe just with the quality of the driver. And with Nikita Mazepin, he has proven himself to be a capable driver. I mean, coming up through the junior ranks, he wasn't really setting the world alight. You know, he was always like there or thereabouts. He won races here and there. He won a few races in Formula 2, some really good performances actually in Formula 2. But I kind of feel as though that Formula 1 might just be that little step too far for him. And it's not just a case of Mazepin. We've seen that with multiple drivers over the years. They've excelled in the junior ranks more so than what Mazepin did in his time, going up through Formula 3, Formula 2 and all that. But then when they hit Formula 1, something just doesn't quite click for them, and they're not able to get the most out of the machinery. They can't really fight for any positions. With Mazepin, when you're comparing yourself to Mick Schumacher, we were expecting Schumacher to be the faster of the two anyway, but by a full minute over the course of a Grand Prix distance, that doesn't do Nikita Mazepin any favours whatsoever. And with 22 coming up, which is what Haas are focusing on, I kind of feel as though in some ways there was some job security there for both Schumacher and for Mazepin. with the team admitting that 21 is just a building year. It's also like, what's the word? An intermittent year, if you like, for lack of better words, where they're just going to get the job done over the course of the season, just see out the season, then put all of their eggs into the 2022 basket. So I kind of felt so that Haas would keep the faith in both Schumacher and Mazepin, saying that we know that you're not going to be at the front this year. We know you're not going to necessarily be fighting for points. Let's just look forward to next year, shall we? And then in 2022, they can both have a proper go at it. But Mazepin being so far behind his teammate in Portimao, it does really beg the question, is Mazepin going to see 2022 in Formula One? I'm a little bit 6 of one, half a dozen of the other at the moment. As Gunther Steiner, the team principal, he's very firm, as we know from his endeavours on Drive to Survive. But at the same time, he's also very fair. Will he honour that? We'll have to wait and see.
No, he's bringing money into the team. So whatever way you look at it, he's got a seat. But I do wonder if it's going to get to the stage where, 4 races in, Yuji Ide was denied a super license because he was a liability out on track. They didn't think he was good enough. Is it going to get to that stage for Nikita Mazepin? I think the jury's still out. It could end up going that way.
Well, with what I was just saying about Mazepin and what you brought up there, Jake, I didn't really want to mention the obvious there about money, because at the end of the day, we know what it's all about. Dimitri Mazepin, he's bringing the money into Team for Haas, is what's keeping them alive in Formula One. And again, it's those two words, job security there. We've seen it before with Lawrence Stroll and Lance Stroll. Lawrence effectively buying the team and guaranteeing his son a spot in Formula One. And we're very much seeing the same thing of Nikita Mazepin. But it's the same situation that we've got a father effectively buying a team for their son. But, you still have to get the job done out on track. And Lance Stroll, we all thought at the time, he's just a pay driver. He's not going to do much. But Stroll's now got, 2-3 podiums in his career? He's proven himself to be more than capable to compete in Formula One. And also the pole position that Lance Stroll got in Turkey last year as well. So he's proven himself. He does deserve his spot in Formula One. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, he does.
Mazepin, he's only 3 races into his career, so he hasn't really had the chance to show that he deserves it yet. But in the absolute god-awful car that Haas has this year, is he going to get that chance to prove himself? Most likely not in 2021. But
I disagree. I think he will, because Dad, like you say, the survival of that team depends on Mazepin. So as far as I can see, he can do no wrong. I think what's likely to happen first is that Gene Haas will sell up. And he'll sell it to Dimitri Mazepin and SMP Racing. And next year you'll have a combination of Kvyat, Schwartzman and Mazepin in the team. I think I genuinely see that's what's going to happen next year. It'll basically be Russia's own Formula One team. I think that's going to happen before Mazepin loses his seat, because it's all about money. The whole thing has all been about money. So it doesn't matter how bad Nikita Mazepin is compared to Mick Schumacher. It really doesn't, because at the end of the day, he's there because Daddy's paying for him to be there. And so there's no way he's going to lose his seat, because the team is surviving based on his appointment. I think what's more likely is that Gene Haas will get fed up with the situation and sell it to them.
I find it very hard to disagree with that, Jake. We talked about it before, about the possibility of SMP buying up the Haas team, possibly rebranding it. If they've got Dimitri Mazepin as the bankroll there, then I think SMP is probably the obvious choice for that team. We've seen it reported however many times now that Gene Haas might end up getting fed up with the sport. And I find it difficult to disagree. It's one of the things, you know me, I'm very passionate about Formula One, about motor racing in general. But one of the things that I've always disliked about the sport is the fact that it is a very money-driven business. It is a business at the end of the day. We've seen so many drivers who are trying to get up to Formula One and they haven't been able to quite make it because of finances. First example, off the top of my head, Robert Wickens, for example. He won so many races in the junior categories and got himself into a test role with Marussia, and he's been touted as one of their race drivers, but he didn't have the money. Luis Razzia with the same team back in 2013. He signed a contract to race for Marussia, but then the sponsors fell through and he lost his seat, and that's when Jules Bianchi was brought in. Felix Rosenqvist, another example, absolutely mega in the junior categories, winning races, winning championships, never even tested a Formula One car because he doesn't have the money. I've always been not quite furious, but a little bit disheartened by that. There's so many drivers I can reel off right now who should be in Formula One.
There's enough drivers who should have been in Formula One to triple the amount of drivers that have raced.
Yeah,
there's no question about that over the decades. But the reality of it is, ever since 1894, when motor racing started, it's been for the rich kids. It always has been. Unfortunately, it's never going to change. I don't genuinely see any circumstance where it's ever going to change. And people can, lament it and complain about it till the cows come home, but it will change nothing. Motor racing is a sport for the wealthy. There is no two ways about it. And it's a shame. You kind of have to accept it and just, understand that that's the way motor racing is always going to be.
Yeah, I think you're completely right there, Jake. It's one of those things you do have to take on the chin a little bit. There's so many different sports where you can enjoy the spectacle of it, but then not necessarily enjoy what goes on in the background. So, again, I'm going to use the analogy of football. Football is a good sport to watch. It's entertaining. You do get the camaraderie between football fans. It's good in that aspect. But I think it was Neymar when he went to Paris Saint-Germain. He went for like 220-something million. And for me, when I saw that figure, it kind of ruined football for me in a way. As I do enjoy it as a sport. But when it comes to the business side of it, the financial side of it, I don't believe for 1 second that any player is worth over 200 million. And we go back to the argument we were saying earlier about the likes of George Russell. Put him up against Sebastian Vettel in the Aston Martin, for example. Who's going to be the better value? Well, you're going to have Sebastian Vettel, who's a proven 4-time world champion, or are you going to put in George Russell, who's an up-and-comer, for a fraction of the price and put more money into developing the car? It just comes down to the fact that it's one of those things that, as you say, Jake, we do have to accept that it is a part of the sport or a part of the business, if you like. And in the case of Mazepin, as we've been talking, in terms of just pure outright ability, there are many other drivers out there who I would have picked over him. But when you've got your own dad buying the team and guaranteeing you a spot, then what can you say to argue against that?
Now, as we look at Mazepin's race weekend as well, just some things that we haven't touched on yet. I don't want to say what Latifi labelled him as in qualifying because it wasn't very nice. I think we can say that to the minimal extent. But also, he was given a 5-second penalty for blocking Sergio Perez in the Grand Prix when Perez was in the lead. Essentially, to me, that penalty is like dumping a bottle of water on yourself to cool yourself down when you're in a swimming pool. It didn't really have an effect on it because he was so far at the back of the grid that the only thing the 5-second penalty would have done is put him behind another car lapping him again, which realistically Formula One shouldn't have. But one thing I do want to say as well, a bit of a comedic element to the Mazepin scenario. And I don't know if you guys actually saw this, but Formula One did not broadcast the driver of the day on their television screens. Now, there was a massive social media movement surrounding Nikita Mazepin in the fact that fans wanted to vote him as driver of the day for no other reason than as a joke.
That they could.
Because they could, like you just said, Jake. And I don't think it could have come at any better race than one where he finished a minute behind his teammate. And to the point where Formula One could not broadcast driver of the day and had to later issue it as Sergio Perez, which I think we all know Sergio Perez was not voted as the driver of the day. Formula One did have to change the vote and get rid of most of the Mazepin votes, at least. Do you guys believe, we'll start with Ryan, then Jake, and then Topher, that if Formula One has to change its voting systems, and this voting system, which was essentially built as a democracy for fans to vote for who they believed was the best driver of the day, if they have to change that result, surely that counts as bringing the sport into disrepute in some form of... Obviously, we know what Mazepin has happened to him, and we know that he isn't the greatest driver in the world when you look at and compare him to all the rest of the drivers and his performance at Portimao. But realistically, should Mazepin be given a super license if this is the point where it's at?
Can I just interject one thing quickly here before we get on to Ryan? This whole democracy thing, this isn't the first time that this will have been exploited. So, Will, I'm going to put a little trivia question to you here. Do you remember who won, in quotation marks, who won the first ever driver of the day vote in Formula One?
I believe it was Rio Haryanto.
Correct. That was for the reason that the fans essentially wanted to make a bit of a mockery of it in some ways. I'm not really sure why they'd want to do that. It's a bit juvenile. But
I never knew that.
Yeah, when it first came about,
that.
I think the actual driver of the day, if I remember correctly, was Romain Grosjean. I think it was the first race that Haas did where they had that exceptional performance. And I think it was Romain Grosjean who should have won driver of the day and eventually was awarded it. But a lot of the fans voted for Rio Haryanto for no other reason that we've got the power in our hands. Let's play around with this a little bit. You know, it's exactly the same thing with what's happened with Mazepin. And I'm sure Ryan's going to have something to say about it in a mo. But yeah, it's just the fans being juvenile, I think, if I want to put it quite bluntly. It's just basically taking the mick out of the whole democracy system, saying, yeah, let's try and make a meme out of this. You know, I think that was the intent. They wanted to get the graphics so they can make memes out of it, basically. I think that was the thinking behind it. But yeah, it's just stupid, in my opinion.
And also at the 2019 Austrian Grand Prix, Robert Kubica was handed driver of the day before Formula One changed it to Max Verstappen. So just to interject that point as well, Ryan.
Well, I just think it's everyone expressing their feeling that they feel with someone like Mazepin in F1. It's a bit of a joke, and the thing is, all that has been around Mazepin since he's came into Formula One is just there's not been any positives really. You know, stuff like, also, I think when they were trundling behind the safety car, he briefly had the fastest lap at some point. So you had people posting, I can't believe it, Mazepin's got the fastest lap. I think it's basically the way of the world saying, look, we think the sport's a bit of a joke, so we're going to treat it as a bit of a joke at this point.
And obviously, Jake, like Ryan just said, Formula One being treated as a joke is not what they want.
Essentially, this is the fans responding and reacting to the calls at the end of last season for them to do something about the fact that Mazepin was coming in, and you know they obviously felt a lot of disquiet about the incident that is now infamous on social media. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, they will only impact change if they feel that it needs to be made. And essentially, from their point of view, it doesn't affect anything to do with them. It doesn't change anything. They've got 20 cars on the grid. They've got 20 drivers on the grid. So from their point of view, it doesn't make any difference. I think what it means, essentially, is that the act of protest is becoming quite an issue for them. I don't know what they expected to happen when Mazepin actually started to race in Formula One, but this is kind of what I envisaged was always going to happen. You know, there was always going to be this reaction. You know, people love the sport, they love it with their whole hearts, and they do get quite passionate about it. We see the trolling and some of the insanity that comes out on social media. People feel passionately about it, so they want to make their voice heard. And if this is the only way, you know, they can show their disquiet about Mazepin, then they're going to use it.
As far as Formula One is concerned, there were calls, as has been said, for Formula One to step in and say that Mazepin can't compete in Formula One. But let's not forget that Mazepin has actually met all of the criteria to become a Formula One driver. That's why he's here in the first place. He's got himself enough super license points across the course of his junior career. He completed at least 300 kilometers of testing prior to him getting the race seat. And Formula One, they don't really... they said at the time that at the end of the day, it's down to the team to decide who to put in their cars. So as far as Formula One is concerned, yeah, Mazepin might have a bit of an image problem, but he has met all of the criteria that is required for him to be a Formula One driver. So at the end of the day, the onus isn't really on Formula One to make that decision. It's down to Haas to make that decision. So what can Formula One do? They have these rules and criteria in place for drivers to enter into Formula One. Mazepin's met those. What can they do, in all honesty?
And just a final point to place on the Mazepin situation before we round off the show is that in 2018, when Max Verstappen fought Esteban Ocon in the Weybridge in the FIA garage, he was handed, I believe it was 1 or 2 days of community service, which apparently is defined as going to a Formula E race, considering that's how Max Verstappen actually passed off his community service. But either way, if Max Verstappen is given community service for shoving Esteban Ocon and calling him a few names, there needs to be better action taken in the future, in my opinion, when regarding situations like this. Anyway, we don't want to end the show on this negative point, so we'll round off the show on a little bit of a brighter note. We want to round up the Grand Prix in 3 words. Mine personally would be don't shorten DRS, because they shortened the DRS zone in order to remove the overpowered nature that we saw it have last year. And realistically, that didn't work. They shortened it too much. So perhaps if we return to Portimao in the future, which hopefully we do, because it is a very good circuit, they maybe increase it by another 50 meters because they reduced it by 100 meters, and that might be a good zone. So, Jake, let's start with you, then Ryan, and then Topher. What are your 3 words to round up this weekend?
Dull but predictable, I would say, because it's the kind of race that, everybody needs to remember that not every Formula One race you ever watch is going to be the most exciting Formula One Grand Prix you're ever going to see in history.
And Ryan?
I'd probably say business as usual. Very much along the same lines as Jake. It's the same 3 on the podium as usual, and the main fireworks as such were going on in the midfield and further on down. But not every race can be fireworks all through the field.
This is a little bit of a difficult one to think about, actually, Will, because I didn't particularly enjoy the Portuguese Grand Prix. I thought it was a bit bland, as a whole. It wasn't the most exciting race we've ever seen, but I think given that we've now had Hamilton win, then Verstappen win, and Hamilton win, I think the 3 words I might have to go with are back and forth. And they're essentially trading blows at the moment, and that could very well continue into the next race, like if Verstappen goes and wins that one. But also, just to expand on that, could end up potentially being back and forth between not just Hamilton and Verstappen, but maybe also Mercedes and Red Bull. So Bottas does have his days where he is really good. He did have quite a good weekend in Portimao, actually. He put on pole and went on to take a podium. But then also look at the other side of the Red Bull garage. Sergio Perez, look at the drive that he put in. Perez is starting to get on top of that car now, and he's starting to get a bit closer to the front-running pace that we know he is capable of. So if he's able to do what the likes of Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon et al. Were not able to do when they were in the Red Bull, which is be at the front as well as Max Verstappen, we might not just have a back-and-forth battle between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen for the driver's title, but we might, just might, also get a back-and-forth battle between Mercedes and Red Bull for the constructors' title.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for joining me for another episode of Maximum Downforce. And thank you very much to all of you who listened at home. Just something we're opening up now. We would also like to hear your what 3 words for the Spanish Grand Prix next weekend. It will be very interesting to see what all of you think. And also, if you want to send us any questions about next week's Spanish Grand Prix, which we will be answering a few of in next week's show, do let us know at Downforce Radio on Twitter or on Downforce Radio on Facebook, or you can even get in contact with me, WillKnight1306 on Twitter. If you want to go and listen to our YouTube channel, it's Downforce Radio once again, and also check out downforceradio.uk. That's downforceradio.uk to read all of the latest news in the world of motorsport and listen to our radio station. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you in Spain. Goodbye.
Go, go, go! Anytime and immediately! This is amazing! The worst start for a Grand Prix